The Bush Bash. Watch USA Today on TV Monday.
A plane crashes in England. The United States and the Soviet Union maneuver over chemical weapons, and in Illinois, a tornado strikes a small town.
This is NBC Nightly News, reported by Garrick Utley.
Good evening from Los Angeles. It was a routine flight today from London to Belfast, Northern Ireland. 125 passengers and crew members were on board the Boeing 737 of British Midland Airlines. And then it happened. Engine trouble. The pilot tried to make an emergency landing at an airport. He almost made it. The plane crash landed along the edge of one of the busiest highways in Britain. Peter Kent reports from London.
The pilot of the London-Belfast commuter jet was attempting an emergency landing at an airport 100 miles northeast of London. The aircraft, with 117 passengers and a crew of 8, came down 3 miles short of the airport on the M1 motorway, this country's main north-south highway.
A lot of noise, as if it was a backfire, flames coming out of the port engine, very much nose up and wing down on the port side as if he was struggling for height.
British Midlands Airlines makes 8 round-trip flights a day between London and Belfast, Northern Ireland. But the airline is based at the East Midlands Airport, where the emergency landing was attempted just under an hour after taking off. Eyewitnesses say the aircraft broke into 3 large parts, ending up against a highway embankment. The aircraft was the newest version of the Boeing 737, known as the 400 series. It had been in service less than 3 months. Coming less than 3 weeks after the terrorist bombing of the Pan Am 747 over Scotland in December, there were initial fears of sabotage. These have eased upon confirmation of the pilot's report of engine trouble and eyewitness accounts of an engine on fire. Nonetheless, a full investigation will begin immediately. Latest reports indicate that more than half of the 125 people on board the aircraft survived the crash landing, some with only minor injuries. But at least 30 fatalities have now been confirmed. Peter Kent, NBC News, London.
The superpowers now. Mikhail Gorbachev has developed the knack of pulling surprises, of grabbing the international spotlight and winning public favor. Today, he did it again through one of his top aides in Paris. There at the International Conference on Chemical Weapons, the Soviet Foreign Minister, Eduard Shevardnadze, announced his country will begin to destroy its stockpile of those weapons. Our chief diplomatic correspondent, John Dancer, reports on the Soviet move today.
The Soviet foreign minister surprised many of the delegates with his pledge to begin destroying the Soviet stockpile of chemical weapons this year. He also said no Soviet weapons are currently stored outside the Soviet Union and pledged the Soviets will not transfer chemical weapons to other countries. Shevardnadze said the Soviet Union would not even wait for the conclusion of separate talks now going on in Geneva on a total ban against all chemical weapons.
We shall immediately proceed to the elimination of our stockpiles of chemical weapons, even before a convention is concluded.
U.S. experts are skeptical that the Soviets have the sophisticated, complicated technology to destroy their chemical weapons safely. Schultz welcomed the Soviet move. He said the United States has destroyed some of its older, obsolete chemical weapons in recent years, but has replaced them with newer ones.
No, we are reducing our net stocks as we proceed. And this is perfectly consistent with our position at the Geneva negotiations.
The 145-nation conference in Paris was called by President Reagan and French President Francois Mitterrand to get countries which signed a 1925 agreement not to use chemical weapons to reaffirm their pledges. The 1925 agreement, which took the U.S. 50 years to sign, grew out of the horrors of poison gas warfare in World War I, warfare that left more than 1 million casualties, soldier and civilian alike. The U.S., the Western Allies, and the Soviet Union all expressed horror at Iraq's recent use of chemical weapons against Kurdish tribesmen during the Iran-Iraq War. There has been an increasing willingness of late to use chemical weapons. Third world countries see them as equalizers, putting them on a par with nuclear powers.
Most nations in the world have the means at their disposal to build chemical weapons. They have it in their fertilizer industry, pharmaceutical, petrochemical, and the kind of chemistry we're talking about required to produce these weapons is college level.
The Iraqi delegate today equated possession of chemical weapons with Israel's possession of nuclear weapons. He refused to sign any ban on chemical weapons because his country has not helped negotiate such a treaty. Israel interrupted from the floor and demanded the right to reply, but will have to wait until its turn tomorrow. At a separate meeting this afternoon, the Secretary of State presented Shevardnadze with U.S. evidence that Libya has built a chemical weapons plant. Schultz asked Shevardnadze to use Soviet influence to get Libya's Colonel Gaddafi to destroy the plant. For the U.S., there is an additional worry about Colonel Gaddafi's possession of chemical weapons. Gaddafi has tried in the past to obtain ballistic missiles.
A nightmare for all, of course, would be the combination of ballistic missiles, chemical warheads, and biological weapons in the hands of governments with histories of the conduct of terrorist violence.
And Schultz warned, time is not on our side. Technology is not stagnant. The 1925 agreement only prevents the use of chemical weapons. It doesn't stop any country from making them or stockpiling them. Many here think that until that happens, it will never be possible to put the genie back in the bottle. John Dancy, NBC News, Paris.
And today, following his meeting with Shevardnadze, Secretary of State Schultz said the Soviets have agreed to look into the American charges that the Libyans are preparing to produce chemical weapons. However, just what is happening at that Libyan plant is still a mystery. This weekend, Western journalists were told that they would be taken to the plant to see for themselves. Well, they were taken for a ride in more ways than one. Here's Jim Bitterman.
Based on Pentagon intelligence, it now seems certain that journalists who toured a Libyan chemical complex yesterday were not shown the building where Washington claims Colonel Gaddafi has manufactured chemical weapons. Apparently, reporters only saw the front part of the huge industrial site. The disputed factory is hidden behind low hills 2/3 of a mile to the rear. There were clear signs, however, that the whole area is under anti-aircraft protection. While the manager of the complex denied chemical weapons were being made there, he acknowledged that there were all sorts of manufacturing activities scattered around the area.
Which are factories for medicines, car assemblies, along with other factories. Et autres industries.
Hundreds of people have set up camp around the complex, offering themselves as martyrs should Washington decide to bomb the plant out of existence.
And we are here to protect our factories, you see, the medicine factory here.
Even if they had been shown the right building, it's doubtful reporters could have verified claims about its potential, since the lightning tour that circled near the plant complex came after dark, when all lights had been shut off as an air raid precaution. And since, immediately thereafter, most of the 250 foreign journalists here were summarily expelled from the country. Before they left, however, Colonel Gaddafi popped up for a surprise media encounter, saying that he was hoping George Bush would treat Libya better than Ronald Reagan did. Asked about an international inspection of the disputed chemical plant, Gaddafi said Libya should not be discriminated against, but would be happy to join representatives for international inspections of armaments plants anywhere in the world, including the United States and Israel. Perhaps the kind of offer his representative will make tomorrow when he speaks before the chemical conference in Paris. Jim Bitterman, NBC News, Tripoli, Libya.
And also on NBC Nightly News this evening, the president is ready to send his last budget to Congress. And in Japan, the mourning for Emperor Hirohito continues. Keith Miller will show us what his passing could mean for modern Japan.
Did you eat all the crackling oat bran?
Define the word eat.
Did you eat all the crackling oat bran?
Yeah.
Did you eat all the crackling oat bran?
Yo, Mom, your shoelace.
With the crunchy sweet taste of Kellogg's Cracklin' Oat Bran, an open box is an empty box.
There is a lot of general talk these days about the Reagan legacy, what he will leave to the nation, and George Bush. Tomorrow, there will be a specific example of it, the budget, Ronald Reagan's last. A federal budget is thick, it has lots of small print, and it makes for dull reading. But it is the starting point in the tough debate between Bush and the Congress over to how to handle the nation's needs. Irving R. Levine offers a preview.
The final Reagan budget running off government presses will be delivered to Congress only 11 days before President Reagan leaves office and George Bush is sworn in. Reagan Budget Director Joseph Wright had to keep that in mind.
This is Ronald Reagan's last budget, and I think it will be a good one for President Bush if he decides to be able to negotiate from at his priorities and go through a very tough congressional year.
The budget conforms with major Bush goals of no new taxes, no cuts in Social Security benefits, overall spending increases no greater than the inflation rate, and a deficit below $100 billion as required by law. To reach those goals, the administration assumes that the economy will grow by 3.4% next year. But most economists expect slower growth. That would mean less tax money collected and a bigger deficit. Interest rates averaging 5.5%. But rates are now running much higher, and every 1% increase in rates adds $10 billion to the deficit. Democrats were dismissing the budget even before it was officially released.
I don't regard President Reagan's budget as relevant to the process in which we're now engaged. I think it qualifies probably as amiable fiction.
The budget calls for government spending of $1,151,800 million, almost double the first Reagan budget 8 years ago, a deficit of $92.5 billion, and a balanced budget by 1993 with a surplus of $2.3 billion. Winners in the fiscal year 1990 budget include the military, which gets $315 billion, an increase of more than $16 billion. AIDS research, drug abuse programs, law enforcement, Superfund for hazardous waste, space programs, and to solve the multi-billion-dollar savings and loan crisis, $10 billion. Losers in the new budget, which cuts $26 billion in domestic programs, include farmers. Subsidy programs are cut by $2 billion, a 15% slash. Amtrak, which loses its entire $605 million subsidy, and providers of Medicare services whose authorized fees are cut.
The Medicare patients themselves are hurt because the Medicare patient is going to have to make up the difference between what Medicare pays the doctor and what the doctor's charges.
President Bush will make changes in the Reagan budget. His problem will be to reconcile two major campaign promises. First, to provide more money for child care, education, and the environment. And second, to do this without raising taxes. Irving R. Levine, NBC News, Washington.
President Reagan appeared to be in good spirits today when he left the hospital following minor surgery yesterday. Mr. Reagan was operated on at the Walter Reed Medical Center for a curvature on his left ring finger. Doctors said it was a minor operation which should heal in about 3 weeks, which means that Mr. Reagan may still be wearing his bulky bandage when he turns over the presidency to George Bush in just 12 days. U.S. Attorney General Dick Thornburg denied today that the Reagan administration was trying to interfere with a special prosecutor's investigation of the Iran-Contra scandal. Lawrence Walsh has moved to drop 2 charges against Oliver North because the administration would not release classified evidence North said he needs for his defense. Thornburg said Walsh told him he had received full cooperation from the intelligence community in his investigation.
Honey, great news. I don't need surgery for my hemorrhoids.
Love your family 25
of nature at this time of year, a tornado in Illinois. National Guard troops are patrolling a large area of the Wabash Valley this evening to prevent looting. As correspondent Stan Bernard reports, the cleanup is underway after the powerful tornado slammed down.
Allendale, Illinois was virtually destroyed by a tornado that ripped up several Kentucky, Indiana towns and then tore into Allendale. In all, 45 people were injured by the twister that hit about supper time last night.
We got our kids into my daughter's bedroom and laid on top of them, and that's when everything just sort of fell in on us. And then after it quieted, we got them out and checked with our neighbors, and they were okay, and we stayed and got everyone in the car. I'm just thankful that we're out with our lives.
And in the light of day, it was clear that it was remarkable that no one was killed. In about 2 minutes, 1/4 of the central business district was destroyed. and fully 1/3 of the population of this little village of 450 people were left homeless. The moment the storm hit was terrifying.
And all of a sudden, I heard this noise, sound like a train. And so I come racing up to the house, screaming at my wife, get to the basement.
Illinois Governor James Thompson went to Allendale.
It looks like most of the community's vital facilities have been wiped out.
And that included the firehouse, the school, and the post office. In this tiny community, the damage has been put at more than $3 million. They will be cleaning up for weeks and trying to patch together their lives which were spared. Stan Bernard, NBC News.
It took 2,000 years, but a revolutionary discovery is changing the way men think about coloring their gray hair. It's called Just for Men, from the leader in men's hair coloring. Simply apply Just for Men, and in 5 minutes, shampoo out. Your gray is blended away, leaving your natural-looking color. 5 minutes. Here, look at me. Just for Men leaves your hair looking healthy and fuller, and it won't fade or wash out. Just for Men, in the men's hair care section.
Does your long distance sound bad? Now you can get long distance that sounds better for free. Switch to US Sprint and get 30 free minutes of crystal clear fiber optic long distance if you call Sprint now. So don't take it out on your phone. Take it out on your phone company. Call now and get 30 free minutes of fiber optic long distance calls only from US Sprint.
If having oatmeal for breakfast gets a little boring, wake it up with the crunchy, nutty taste of Grape Nut cereal. Grape nuts and oatmeal. Pick them up, then mix them up, stir them up, and cook them up. Rev up the texture, turn up the flavor.
To go, ready in just 1 hour.
Politics now. If you want a challenging job, how about chairman of the Democratic Party? The old one, Paul Kirk, is stepping down, and there are 5 Democrats who want to take his place. The challenge is to help to come up with the policies and the personalities which could win the White House in 1992. It isn't going to be easy, but the would-be chairmen are conducting a tough campaign, appealing to Democrats who elect their next party chairman. Ken Bodie reports from Atlanta.
The omelets are courtesy of Jim Stanton. A former congressman from Ohio, Stanton is one of 5 candidates for the job of Democratic National Chairman. Stanton will spend $250,000 to $300,000 to win the job, part of it on this video, with endorsements from famous Democrats, which he'll mail to every voting member of the committee.
He'd be a beautiful chairman of our party.
Another candidate making a video is Rick Weiner, state chairman of Michigan. One requirement of the job is to be good on television, so Weiner hired a media coach, the same one who helped Lee Iacocca and the Pope. A third candidate, former Maryland Congressman Mike Barnes, here shopping for votes among labor leaders. 5 candidates in all, and this weekend they began wooing the 400-plus voting committee members in sessions in Chicago and Atlanta.
I appeared on Meet the Press, Face the Nation, McNeil Lehrer 27 times. I have been on the Phil Donahue Show.
The main question facing the Democrats in this race for chairman is how to become competitive at the presidential level after 3 straight landslide losses.
We cannot be a major political party unless we start winning the presidency.
Another former congressman, Jim Jones of Oklahoma. Jones has strong appeal in the South, where the big question is, how do the Democrats begin to win back the white vote?
We think Democrats got about 25% of the white vote.
The front runner right now probably is Ron Brown, who was Jesse Jackson's convention manager last summer and who also has worked for Ted Kennedy and Michael Dukakis. Some committee members say privately that Brown's association with Jackson and his race both send the wrong message to the
but
South.
Frankly, I think you can make a much more logical argument that the next chairman of the Democratic National Committee is going to have a good relationship with Jesse Jackson. And with every
This race has a month to go, and it looks right now as if no candidate could win on the first ballot. Ken Bodie, NBC News, Atlanta.
Some health news. Caffeine may reduce a woman's chances of getting pregnant by as much as 50%. According to a study published in the British medical journal Lancet, researchers said women who drank more than a cup of coffee a day were half as likely to get pregnant. It was the first study to provide such a link between caffeine and pregnancy, but the researchers warned there is not yet enough evidence to consider these findings conclusive.
Now stay tuned for Errol's all-time classic, The Adventures of Robin Hood, next on 20 Vision.
It's not often that you can point to a specific day and say, this was the beginning of a new era. Today in Japan, you could. It was the first day of the reign of Emperor Akihito. He is Japan's 125th emperor. He succeeds his father, Hirohito. And in the eyes of the Japanese, that officially means a new era has begun. What will it mean? Here's Keith Miller in Tokyo.
It was the first day of a new era in Japan, but many people spent it grieving over the death of Emperor Hirohito. There was a rush to record condolences in the imperial registry. Inside the palace, the imperial family conducted a night-long vigil beside the emperor's body. This morning, the Japanese cabinet approved February 24th as the date for the state funeral. In the meantime, the country is in mourning. In Kyoto, the ancient capital, and all across the country, millions of people paid their respects. The expressions of sorrow showed the magnitude of their loss and revealed the emotions of a people known more for their restraint.
Majority of Japanese have lived, turbulent decades with the emperor. And the emperor, the late emperor, to us was like a big father.
Shops stayed open, but storefront decorations were removed. Department stores draped window displays to honor the world's longest reigning monarch before his death Saturday at the age of 87. Some industries slowed production in tribute, but printing plants were working overtime to meet the demand of a new reign, since today is the first day of the first year of Heisei, which means the achievement of peace. It also ends the era of Showa, Hirohito's reign, meaning enlightened peace. Calendars, postage stamps, and official seals must be changed to reflect the new era and the date of its inception. The new emperor, Akihito, is Japan's 125th emperor, but his coronation will not take place for a year to allow the nation to pay respect to his father. Japanese television devoted hours of programming to introduce the new emperor and his family. He is being presented as a thoroughly modern monarch, and many predict Akihito will symbolize a new and more compassionate Japan.
I think Japanese society will become more liberal, more accessible to foreigners as well, and it will be less hierarchical, less authoritarian, more democratic.
A few people tested that theory today by staging a demonstration denouncing Japan's imperial system. Leftists claim the late emperor was responsible for Japan's involvement in the Second World War. But many young people appeared indifferent to the passing of the emperor. To many of them, he was a remote symbol of the past, the end of what they consider their era. It has been 62 years since Japan buried its last emperor, and officials say the funeral for Hirohito will be an elaborate ceremony, befitting the country's imperial tradition that dates back some 2,000 years. Keith Miller, NBC News, Tokyo.
And that is our report on this Sunday evening. Tom Brokaw will be here tomorrow. I'm Garrick Utley. Good night for NBC News.
Nose up and wing down on the port side as if he was struggling for height.
British Midlands Airlines makes 8 round-trip flights a day between London and Belfast, Northern Ireland. But the airline is based at the East Midlands Airport, where the emergency landing was attempted just under an hour after taking off. Eyewitnesses say the aircraft broke into 3 large parts, ending up against a highway embankment. The aircraft was the newest version of the Boeing 737, known as the 400 series. It had been in service less than 3 months. Coming less than 3 weeks after the terrorist bombing of the Pan Am 747 over Scotland in December, there were initial fears of sabotage.
There at the International Conference on Chemical Weapons, the Soviet Foreign Minister, Edward Shevardnadze, announced his country will begin to destroy its stockpile of those weapons. Our chief diplomatic correspondent, John Dancer, reports on the Soviet move today.
The Soviet foreign minister surprised many of the delegates with his pledge to begin destroying the Soviet stockpile of chemical weapons this year. He also said no Soviet weapons are currently stored outside the Soviet Union and pledged the Soviets will not transfer chemical weapons to other countries. Shevardnadze said the Soviet Union would not even wait for the conclusion of separate talks now going on in Geneva on a total.
These have eased upon confirmation of the pilot's report of engine trouble and eyewitness accounts of an engine on fire. Nonetheless, a full investigation will begin immediately. Latest reports indicate that more than half of the 125 people on board the aircraft survived the crash landing, some with only minor injuries. But at least 30 fatalities have now been confirmed. Peter Kent, NBC News, London.
The superpowers now. Mikhail Gorbachev has developed the knack of pulling surprises, of grabbing the international spotlight and winning public favor. Today, he did it again through one of his top aides in Paris, 7 of British Midland Airlines. And then it happened. Engine trouble. The pilot tried to make an emergency landing at an airport. He almost made it. The plane crash landed along the edge of one of the busiest highways in Britain. Peter Kent reports from London.
The pilot of the London-Belfast commuter jet was attempting an emergency landing at an airport 100 miles northeast of London. The aircraft, with 117 passengers and a crew of 8, came down 3 miles short of the airport on the M1 motorway, this country's main north-south highway.
A lot of noise, as if it was a backfire. Flames coming out of the port engine. Very much.
The Bush Bash. Watch USA Today on TV Monday.
A plane crashes in England. The United States and the Soviet Union maneuver over chemical weapons, and in Illinois, a tornado strikes a small town.
This is NBC Nightly News, reported by Garrick Utley.
Good evening from Los Angeles. It was a routine flight today from London to Belfast, Northern Ireland. 125 passengers and crew members were on board the Boeing 737.